going into 2024, we can see that the competition between Intel and AMD is really heating up. AMD is definitely going to challenge Intel, especially I think in the, let's say, the consumer side and on the laptop side, which we'll look into further detail later on in the video. And also, in addition to that, they will obviously have a fight off in the server side. We will also look at the revenues historically in the past, let's say, 5-6 quarters, and project my estimations for next year and maybe going into 2025. In addition to that, we know that these two companies are facing challenges not only with each other, but also we know that the M series of chips from Apple is basically eating into this whole market segment in the laptop side, which is a big chunk of the market for Intel and AMD. And also we know that Qualcomm in their turn are also launching ARM-based CPUs, which we will probably see going into next year. Let's say so first half of next year. I expect that at the CES show next year in early January, I think we will see loads of new laptops from Qualcomm and Windows. So before we get to 2024, let's see where we are right now. So right now we know that Intel just launched Meteor Lake, and we'll look into Meteor Lake in more detail later in the video, but we can just start with to say that so Meteor Lake launched on Intel's 4 process, and it's basically a hybrid architecture with a Crestmont E-core and Redwood Cove P-core. Now, Meteor Lake was quite a bit hyped up, and we will see later that it didn't really manage to live up to the hype, but it's still, I would say, a good product. It's just, yeah, it's gonna mean quite a bit for Intel's consumer side, and also due to the fact that they are using the Crestmont E-cores and the Redwood Cove P-cores in their next generation server lineups launching mid to late next year. And we can basically project based on Meteor Lake where we expect the performance of Intel's next generation server lineup, which is basically coming after the just recently launched Emerald Rapids. So going into 2024, we know that AMD on the server side and data center side goes into this fight with a lot of Zen 4 based CPUs and servers. We know that they have up to 128 cores. We have Genoa based on TSMC 5nm, which I think was the first Zen 4 based AMD server launched late 2022 actually. So this one was launched late last year and still very competitive with both Sapphire Rapids, which launched early this year, and just recently launched the Emerald Rapids from Intel, which goes up to 64 cores, I think. We know also that during this year, AMD launched Genoa X, so it's basically those 96 Zen 4 cores with additional of 3D cache. I think is 1152 megabytes additional 3D cache. So for some type of workloads, that obviously will improve a lot. And then also they launched Bergamo, again on TSMC 5nm, like every other AMD Zen 4 based server lineup. And Bergamo is shining with again basically increased 128 Zen 4 C cores. Don't focus so much on the implications here, but it's basically a more densely packed core, so they can basically pack more cores in the same rough area. And yeah, there are obviously gonna be some drawbacks with the clock speeds, but in some workloads you obviously don't need those. So this is a Bergamo on 5nm is optimized for lower frequency. And then they also launched Sienna, which is basically again based on the same Zen 4 C cores on Bergamo, but it's just up to 64 cores. And we know that going into next year, AMD will basically draw the sword first, and they will launch their Zen 5 based CPUs both on consumer and also of course in server lineup. And they're supposed to be called Turin and Turin X most likely. Again, we don't know a whole lot about these cores. We just know that they're, as ever before with AMD Zen lineup, probably will bring something like, I would assume, like probably 20% better in the IPC. And yeah, these ones are gonna like basically increase the bar again. So this is where I'm starting to like thinking about Intel, because we know that Intel is at the same time just recently launched Emerald Rapids, and Emerald Rapids is quite good. I mean, it's competing against AMD's Zen 4 lineup that we just spoke about quite well. It's not leading, especially not in the, let's say, performance per watt. And since AMD has so many different derivatives of Zen 4 based servers, they are basically, yeah, I mean, they can optimize for different workloads. So I wouldn't say that Intel is anywhere close to taking the lead, but you could say that they are not in as bad a position as they were, let's say, in 2021 or 2022, but still quite a bit off from AMD. And the problem here is that next year we are supposed to see the next generation Intel server lineups. And what the problem with them is that, as we mentioned before with Meteor Lake, so the Meteor Lake E and P cores are gonna basically be derived into two different server chips from Intel late next year. And these server chips gonna be called Sierra Forest, which are gonna be based on the same Crestmont E cores that we saw on Meteor Lake. And then the P cores in Meteor Lake, they will, so basically the Redwood Cove P cores, we will see them in the Granite Rapids server lineup. Both of these two servers gonna be based on Intel 3 process. So I would say it's not a full node improvement above the Intel 4, which Meteor Lake is based on, but it's still some kind of improvement. And here's where the problem for Intel arises in my mind, because if you compare, let's say, the P core, so the Redwood Cove P core, which we will see in the Intel Granite Rapids lineup, with up to supposed 120 cores. Now, those 120 Redwood Cove P cores are gonna fight against like newly packed Zen 5 based on 3 nanometer TSMC node, which will be probably 20, maybe 25% better than Zen 4 cores in AMD's current lineup on server side. And you would argue that AMD is already in a leading position. And since we know that the Redwood Cove P core on Meteor Lake is performing equally or in the same ballpark at some of the nice Zen 4 cores, I just cannot see how Intel is gonna take the lead here. At the best case scenario, maybe they will tie with AMD, but I don't think even that is possible. So most likely AMD's lineup is gonna be robust next year and take market share from Intel. So going into the consumer side, starting with the mobile, we know that AMD launched Phoenix in early 2023, and they will improve upon Phoenix with let's say a kind of rebrand, which will be called Hawkpoint. And Hawkpoint will be basically same kind of Phoenix chip, which is really great to be honest, with just improved AI engine by up to like 40 to 60%. And later, I would say the real successor to Phoenix is called Strix Point, and Strix Point is gonna probably be, according to Moore's Law is Dead, which is a leaker and gaming hardware podcast that I follow, which seems to have quite a good information recently. And according to him and many other industry sources, they seem to believe that there will be 12 Zen 5 cores, which is basically 50% increase in number of cores, in addition to, let's say, 20 to 25% performance increase on each of those cores. So it's going to be substantially better performance on CPU side on already great Phoenix and Hawkpoint. And in addition to that, we will see like 30% more graphics working units, which probably will have some improved performance as well. So most likely at least 40% better improvement on the graphics side as well. And together, these two APUs, so Phoenix, Hawkpoint, and also Strix Point, which will launch probably mid to early 2024, are gonna fight off against Intel's Meteor Lake. And we know that, I mean, Meteor Lake is good, it's not bad, but I would have expected at least half a gen improvement above Phoenix from Meteor Lake. And looking at the reviews, it most likely looks like it's equal to Phoenix, and it's basically a year later than Phoenix. And not only is going to fight against Phoenix next year, it's going to fight against a Phoenix version, which we mentioned was Hawkpoint with better AI engine, which also will be much better than the AI engine on Meteor Lake, which was kind of a selling point for Meteor Lake from Intel. So that's a problem for Intel. And in addition to that, I mean, I cannot see like other than carnage on the mobile side, on the laptop side for Intel next year, because we can see here that Strix Point is gonna definitely be the better product there. I mean, 12 Zen 5 cores against those Meteor Lake, what is it, like 8 P cores and some, yeah, or maybe 6 P cores and a few of the E cores, but it's barely competitive to the current 8 Zen 4 cores in Phoenix. So I just cannot see how Intel is going to compete at the highest level on laptop CPU and APU side. And we haven't mentioned that AMD is supposed to have strict Halo, which is like 16 Zen 5 cores and 40 RDNA 3.5 cores. And that's going to be like something like a PlayStation 5 level of performance in your laptop. So AMD is going into 2024 guns blazing. Although Meteor Lake is okay, yeah, I expect AMD to take market share big time on the mobile side in consumer. And going into the desktop, and this is actually where Intel's problem is going to be even more visualized. We know that, I mean, going into Amazon's bestseller, you can just see that, yeah, AMD is dominating quite a bit. And there was this headline about AMD, basically, where Ryzen 7800 X3D is selling something like 13 to 14 more times than Intel's most popular chip for 9 straight months. So Intel is losing market share on the desktop side, and this is, again, you can see that it's like Zen 4 and Zen 3 lineup. And although Intel is going to launch Arrow Lake late next year, AMD will be very early with Zen 5 next year. I expect like maybe Q2 next year we will see Zen 5 on the market. So even on the desktop side, we I mean, it's just like most likely the same case with AMD dominating here and most likely taking market share. Additional to that, we know that Intel has recently ventured into the GPU side, although with, let's say, not so great performance. And AMD is doing, I mean, they're doing quite good for themselves. Obviously, when we're going into the GPU side on the consumer market, Nvidia is the big boss there, and they are definitely in the leading position. But it looks like AMD's positioning, especially below the highest end, so let's say in the mid-range side, their 7800 XTX are selling really, really well. And most like, according to Moore's Law, is that it's basically selling really good historically, especially in this kind of slow market. So you would expect that in 2023, well, the inflation is still an issue for most of the developed economies, and consumers aren't there to be seen. This is obviously seen in also other areas, like people don't buy cars, so you don't have money to spend on these like hobby things like new laptops and computers. So despite that, it looks like AMD is doing really well on the GPU side and Intel is not. I mean, they're just starting, to be honest, but so we shouldn't expect them moving mountains. But um, I don't see any surprises on Intel next year with regards to the GPU side of the market. Whereas AMD, I expect, like, yeah, I think they will sell solidly. And we also know that PlayStation 5 is selling really, really well, although Xbox sales starts to fade a bit. But then again, that's probably equal with the handhelds gaining pace, these new handheld consoles. So that was a bit of background on the consumer side and also on the client and the server side. We can see that the graph, Intel's client computing going from Q4 2021 and going up to Q3 2023, we see that client computing has been taking a hit, and obviously the lowest point was early this year and late last year, but so we've seen some rebound. But then again, look at the revenue of this quarter compared to Q1 of 2024. It's, yeah, not a good looking, to be honest, although the profit is fairly okay in this segment. And we can see that historically, Intel was really, really relying on data center. But yeah, over the past couple of years, the data center is just eroding for Intel. And this is where the problem lies for Intel's stock value, in my opinion. Because this used to be much larger and this used to be like nice margins, but now they are facing competition from AMD. And let's just have a look at AMD. You can see here that although they are not like doing, I mean, they're stable at 1.5 to, let's say, 2 billion US dollar per quarter, but their margins are better. And you have to say that this is where, in my opinion, so Intel is basically what they could have done They could have basically hold the prices and lose on the revenue volume. So that's the issue. So what they've decided to do is basically cut the prices, but so lose the margin, but at least don't lose a whole lot of market share. So they're making life tough for AMD. I mean, they're not making it like they're not giving up without a fight, but you cannot continue have to have this kind of margins forever. And with those data that I showed you in the first section of the video with AMD's data center lineup, I just cannot see how long this can continue for Intel. I mean, if AMD Zen 5 based servers are gonna just basically completely run over Intel's equivalent, and the only response Intel has late next year is with those server lineups that we mentioned before. I mean, I cannot just see how they're gonna go to into 2025 as well very well. So I see that AMD will get some more market share here, and at some point you should start to see their operating income and margins go up as well. Now for Intel also their network and edge group is fairly big, which is basically the third part of their revenue, and even there you can see the same kind of trend going down since 2021, and they're not making a whole lot of money here. And going into AMD, we can see they are a bit more even. I mean, we looked at the data center, client, CPU and IPU side, as I mentioned, together with gaming. This is where I think AMD is going to excel next year, especially on the client side, with all the like competitive edge they will have compared to Intel on the laptop side and also on the DIY market. I think AMD is gonna probably getting close to 2 billion or maybe above that with good margin next year. I mean, if they have an explosion on laptop sales, maybe from like the holiday season next year, like going into October and Q3 next year, I think AMD will definitely take some market here from Intel. Then we have on the GPU and gaming console side, and I think again going into next year, I haven't looked all into detail into Nvidia in this video, but I think AMD will definitely do well in here. So maybe not a giant increase, but they will do steady. And then there's the embedded side. To be honest, I don't know a whole lot about this segment, but all we can see here that this is the side or the leg of the business which enjoys very nice margins. Look at the revenue and the operating income is basically most likely around 50%. So let's have a look also at the R&D budget on AMD and Intel. We can see that AMD is basically on average, at least on the past 3 quarters, roughly, let's say from anywhere from 40% to or 20% to 40% of Intel's R&D budget. And despite that, they are basically kicking Intel in the behind when it comes to especially on the server market and the data center side. But also obviously as we saw that client side starts to look really good for AMD, which is basically the equivalent segments for Intel, which is basically again data center and client computing. So the two biggest segments for Intel is basically the two biggest places where AMD has their stronghold. Now, the wild card, in my opinion, is basically Intel's IFS. So we see that customers are enjoying Intel's new 4 nanometer 4, or let's say Intel 4 process, but also there's been quite a bit of rumors on Intel 3 and Intel 18 angstrom. So with addition to that, also we know that Intel managed, at least the rumors are that Intel managed to get the first delivery of the 6 first high-NA EUV machines, lithography machines from the Dutch company ASML, which some people argue is the reason why TSMC was gaining, let's say, technologically on Intel in the last 10 years. And again, some people would say that, and in that case, maybe that's an advantage going from now on to Intel. But again, I don't think you can just make that conclusion based on those high-NA EUV machines. I think there's more nuance to that, and there's a whole lot of expertise and manufacturing expertise in TSMC that made them the juggernaut that they are now in manufacturing of the chips. But at least you could say this is not like the worst news for Intel to have the first 6 deliveries of the ASML high NA EUV machines. And going into the future, I really expect Intel. This is where if they are not able to manage defending the data center revenue and to some degree the client computing from AMD, in addition to the attacks from, let's say, Apple and Qualcomm on both of these companies, to be honest, at least you would expect that the Intel IFS, or internal foundry services, that they are start to get some traction. I mean, we can see here that the foundry services have been like at, let's say, anywhere from 100 to 300 million US dollar on quarterly basis. Sometimes with good margin, sometimes with very bad margin. But I mean, if they are going to replace Taiwan Semiconductor, then you would easily see this segment, the IFS segment, to be their main segment and the biggest segment for Intel. And this could basically be the breeding, let's say the savior for Intel in the coming few years. But then you could also say that the client computing and data center could have probably a couple of more years before the things are getting really, really bad. So if Intel manages to perform somewhat on the successor to the Meteor Lake that I mentioned before, then maybe we are gonna to have to revalue Intel. But right now, especially since that the stock actually, I mean, you can see that the stocks has been going up quite a bit over the past year. I think at the worst it was around 24 or something. Let's have a look. So you can see that, yeah, it was 25 or something in February this year. So it's more than doubled since the bottom in early this year. And the market cap has already, I mean, doubled since then. So it's not anymore the case that it's severely undervalued, but if the margins start to return and they manage to hold their revenue, you could say that then compared to, especially not AMD, but if you compare that, the base that they have compared to Nvidia's valuation of 1.2 trillion, which is 6 times the market cap of Intel. And we know that Nvidia is much more, I mean, they are basically a much more risky bet in my opinion, although they are like the king of the hill in GPU and on the AI for now. There's a lot of margins to be lost for Nvidia. Whereas for Intel and AMD, I think both of the companies are fairly kind of valued. They have been increasing stock price quite a bit this year, as Nvidia has as well. But I think there's much more room to grow for these two companies. There's and especially for AMD, because not only like they have good lineup, the valuation is good. So I still like AMD more than the other two. Intel is not, I mean, it's not as bad as, or like the skies are not as dark as you would have expected, let's say a couple of years ago. At least there seems to be, like, for example, Meteor Lake, although not as good as that everyone believed, it's still fairly good, and it shows that Intel 4 process is kind of working okay. And if we're sitting here next year and they manage to execute on Intel 3 and Intel 20 angstrom, then I think definitely we need to reevaluate Intel. So yeah, sorry for our extremely long video, but this was always coming for me, and I think it's important to not only look at the numbers, because you have to know where we are going from now, and the only way to know that, at least the best way to estimate that, is to make your homework on the technicals, to understand the node, the process node, the manufacturing node, the product lineup, as we've spoken a bit about. And if you think that you would like to listen more to these kind of, let's say, both financial and technical discussions, let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.